Thanks again for joining, everybody. It is good to be back with my friend and business partner, Manuel Weiss. Manny, remind us again who you are.
I'm your partner. Together, we are building the Productized Studio Fund, where we buy small digital service agencies. And so far, we own two, and looking to buy more this year.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, we did this about a quarter ago. I was looking at the dates. I think it was the end of October. So we're recording this now at the end of January 2025. So good time for an update. I figured we'd kind of start us off with things that we learned in the last quarter as we reflect back. And we do this for the audience's context. We do this ideally in person every quarter or so. Now, Manny lives in Austria and I live in the US, so we don't always make it in person. Sometimes it's a little more virtual or we spread it out to every 6 months. But ultimately, we try to kind of do this internally. We won't share quite everything we share internally, maybe publicly, but a lot of it I think is pretty useful and interesting. So we'll start with there. Like Manny, anything stand out from you in this last quarter or maybe last year that you picked up on our journey?
Yeah, I think outside of what we figured out about our businesses, I think it was really great to meet you in person in Boston and, take the time to also talk about ourselves and our relationship with each other more, learning more about our backgrounds, right? Because of course we know the high level and, I feel like I know you quite well, but I learned things that I hadn't known about you. And I think it's very important, right? Gets us closer to each other and understand each other much better. And, I think it's just about it was a healthy relationship, and stuff like that keeps it a very healthy relationship. So that was really great.
I'll pause you right there because that's a really good one. I didn't even think about that, but I had, for context, if anybody is curious about this, I had heard at we had a speaker come into my EO forum, which is like mastermind group, and he was a what does he call himself? Like a business partner therapist or co-founder therapist, and that's like his specialty. He had I think studied some kind of like marriage psychology, and then realized that that's very close to founder psychology, co-founder psychology. And anyway, one of the things I took away from him talking to us was you have to, if you want this thing to be successful in the long term, you have to work on the relationship itself, not just on the business together. Because at the end of the day, both of our lives are going to take turns and they're going to diverge at times and converge at times. And sometimes we may be in a space where we can't devote the level of commitment to the business, or maybe we've decided we want to go a different route. And it's really important that Manny and I have the trust with each other to talk about that, to be honest with each other that this, like, look, this isn't working, or the way that this is going is not the way I want to do it. I want him to be able to tell me that, and vice versa. So that was kind of my background and why I did that. I don't think we're probably gonna do it every quarter because it's probably a bit
Yeah.
heavy, but every year or two to do that like deep dive
Yeah.
and like get to know each other better on a level that we don't normally talk about, I think is super helpful.
Yeah. And I think one other thing that I learned, or that gave me reassurance in my or our approach of how we built this, is might be interesting for the audience, is we were close to actually signing a deal to purchase another business, but at the last moment it fell through. And I was reflecting on it, and I still think we did everything pretty well, right? I can go into this saying, okay, there was nothing that I felt like I messed up. I think we were very truthful and honest. And in the end, it didn't work out. But the relationship with the person is still very good, right? And I think all in all, it's sad that it didn't happen, but it also reassures me that, right, we talked last time we talked about we don't want to pull a quick one over people. And I think, again, we went about this in a very good way. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And for me, it's reassuring that, this didn't ruin my life, right? It's just, man, it would have been really, really nice, but it didn't work out. Okay, on to the next one. Slow and steady. We go and plow ahead.
Yeah, learnings wise for me, that the pacing of acquisitions and the nature of this thing that we're trying to do is slow and steady is a good way to describe it. It's all about timing. So what I mean is nobody goes in and just because Carl sent a cold email, they decide to sell their business that week. Like, doesn't happen that way. This is not a sale that closes in 90 days from when I send that first contact. It's likely a sale that closes on average a year or two within the time I send that first email. And so I've started thinking about our approach to how we we do acquisitions and build up the businesses very differently, and thinking much more in a time span of like, how do I set us up so that we have this great pipeline in a year? And yeah, like we're going to build the early parts of the pipeline now, but really things will start to close, just statistically speaking, is probably not going to close for 6 to 12, 18 months. And I have to be okay with that level of time span and patience, because this is a complicated, big sale for people. Nobody sells their business on a whim. It's just not the way it works. So I think really, like for me, the takeaway, and this kind of really goes into the goals that we're setting this year, but it's just that, like, instead of thinking about like, how do I find 5 companies that I might be able to buy this year, think about how do I build up a pipeline and have 100 conversations with potential sellers this year. And some of them will move forward, some of them will slow down, some of them might want something totally different, whatever. I want to just have 100 conversations. And that's been a big game changer to me.
Yeah, and I think that approach also just allows for playing the long game and not focusing on short-termism, right? Which is, I read a great book recently, and we can talk about this at the end of the conversation when we talk about books we've read. But the book basically talks about this mindset and this approach quite a bit as well.
It's kind of a good, quick takeaway from this last quarter and this last year, I think, for both of us. One of the other things that I've been learning, I guess, or taking away in the last year, and we've both seen, is that our teams and people will rise to the level that we allow them to. And in other words, I think we are still often the bigger blockers on letting our teams kind of thrive. And this is. I'll give a personal example. With Draft.dev, we released essentially a new service line this last year. And the first 3 to 6 months, I was really very heavily involved. And I was, in the client meetings, helping set this up and mastermind it in a way and get it started. By about 4 or 5 months in, one of our people said, Karl, you need to step away from this project. It's not that you can't do it. It's that, like, the team needs to learn to do it, and you have to stop like holding their hand and kind of doing it. Plus, I am not a detail person, so I tend to be like, yeah, we'll figure out the small stuff, and the team's like wants to know the details and they want to be able to communicate them, and very understandably. And I think, again, like me stepping away from that in the last 2 months has really helped them level it up and make it their own. And that's been a big learning, a reminder to me that teams will rise to the occasion when you give them the space to do it. But if you constantly hold their hand and think you need to be there, they're going to keep relying on you. And so I just have to remember that.
2 points there. Number one, I think it's a great signal in terms of company culture that the team feels comfortable to approach us in that way and say, hey, you need to step back, right? That's not a given. I think that says a lot about the company culture. And number 2, if you feel you're too hands-on, then I still need to learn a lot there. And I feel like I've improved a lot in the last quarter with letting things more go. But, if you say you need to let things more go, then I definitely need to let things go. And isn't it peculiar? Because I would say like 4 out of 5 times, if not more, if we actually let go of things with the teams that we have, they don't disappoint us, right? These people don't disappoint us, and still somehow it feels like, maybe I should, not micromanage, but maybe I should give my 2 cents to this. But no, they don't need it. They can run with it.
Yeah, yeah. The danger in giving your 2 cents all the time is that people assume you want to keep giving your 2 cents on every little thing. It is. So it's like a team. Here's the way I've seen it bear out for me. It's like a team member comes to me and says, "Hey, Karl, we're updating the copy on this page. Could you take a look at it and give me your suggestions?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's great. I know how to write copy. I think I'm great at it." So I go give them a bunch of suggestions. Of course, they follow them all because I'm the CEO. That they're not going to say no. And then next time they're going to update a page, what do? They're going to come back to me. So now I'm always a bottleneck on building new landing pages, and I have to really get myself in this habit of being like, okay, I trust you. We'll go change it in 6 months if it's terrible. Like, who cares? Like, it's not the end of the world.
And this is a nice segue into some other things that we implemented recently across the companies. But I really think like you need to give the people autonomy, but also clarity of vision, because autonomy without clarity of vision is just chaos, right? Everybody
Chaos,
tries to do something. It's not very effective. Let's say it like that, right? So what Karl and I have been doing is we've been establishing some frameworks that we want to instill into pretty much every operating company that we own, where we have a layer of how we do specific things, and it can be replicated in each company. Let's see how long like the current setup works, but at the moment I think it's working very well. And so, for example, what we implemented now in the second company, the podcast consultant, is that we also have a weekly report card meeting, which is a weekly meeting that has been going very well and has been very good for the team over at Draft.dev. So now we also have that meeting at the podcast consultant. And already I feel like cross-departmentally, people are so much better aligned. They have better context and know what's going on, and, can provide helpful context, but also stay in their lane when they need to without, distracting any ongoing projects. I think it's very valuable.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, to kind of preface that too, it would be helpful is like looking at our high level goals for this year ahead. We basically, Manny and I both have sort of decided that our highest leverage point, the place where we can make the biggest impact, is two things. One is finding new companies to acquire and merging them in successfully, because that increases both our top line revenue, our team size, our stability, the sort of like diversity of revenue streams we have, and it's kind of like building us towards this long-term mission of building a great group of service businesses. And then part two is helping to figure out pathways to get leaders into those companies and people kind of working up to maybe the CEO spot, the COO spot, some kind of leadership role that is not just reliant on us to be the leaders. Because today with both companies, we are the backstop, we're the final decision makers. And we'd ideally like not to be that final decision maker, maybe more just an advisor by the end of this year, or maybe into next year. So those are kind of our two big high level goals. And so, to that end, part of the thing we took on this year was let's try to standardize some of how the companies run. So, for those of you who don't know, we use OKRs at both companies now, objectives and key results. And then we use a check-in system. We have like weekly, monthly, and quarterly kind of check-in and measurement set in place. It's heavily inspired by like EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. To me, a lot of their ideas are really good and similar. It's also, again, using the OKRs framework. So that's a framework that we took off the shelf, and then just tweaking it to the level that the teams are ready to handle. I think this is where it's interesting and tricky, is like, we don't have massive management teams, either of these companies, they're small. So we really have to be like, a little flexible in our structure. We don't want to give too much rigidity and too much like overhead for like, tracking every single thing, or getting people like bogged down in like, tons of management work to do when they're basically still tacticians. But at the same time, we need to give them, like you said, structure and clarity on where we're going and what you're working on, and giving each other insight into that. So I think so far it's looking pretty good.
One interesting point that is slightly related to what we just talked about is when you were talking about bringing leaders into the businesses. One thing that I think might be interesting for the listeners to hear is something that I thought was somewhat counterintuitive. Was, it, previously, when I thought about, who would be the dream person to come into a business and run it, it's like, okay, somebody who has done this before, maybe sold a business like this, has vast experience, so we just need to create the revenue and the profit so we can afford the person. But you actually went to a bunch of acquisition entrepreneurship conferences, and there the vast majority of advice was not that. Can you let the people know what actually the advice was?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. That was a big learning for me for last quarter. So one of my goals last quarter, personally, for the company, was to speak to 20 plus entrepreneurs who have hired a CEO, COO, somebody to run their company and step out of the day to day. And in doing that, I had a lot of one-to-one conversations. I got a lot of intros to interesting people who've done really big things. And then I also went to the Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition conference here in Chicago. They do every year. And the keynote happened to be Justin Ishbia, who runs Shore Capital. And the great thing about them is they are like what we're doing on steroids. Like they're thousands of times bigger, like just insane. So it's a private equity company, and they buy hundreds, literally hundreds of small, mostly service businesses, across the country and raise billions of dollars to do it. I mean, it's a massive operation, right? But what he said, he kind of gave a pipeline for how they build their leadership pipeline, or he gave a template for how they build their leadership pipeline. And I'm like, this is fantastic. So what I pulled away from that was that almost all of the successful leaders they've had and all the other CEOs I've talked to have been internal promotions, meaning they were not people who were hired guns from the outside. What Justin Ishbia said was that for him, those people who've already done this before are not going to want to step back 2 steps in their career to go run a tiny business again. What you want to find is someone young, hungry, and ready to go take on something they've not done before, who's ambitious, and like that's going to appeal to them. A, they're cheaper because they haven't proven themselves and done this before. B, they have that like chutzpah to just go figure stuff out. And then the key is, which I think this was a really big insight for me, for him, and Shore Capital, is they build a really good board, a support board around that person. So instead of just saying, "Hey, you're in charge of this little company, you're right out of an MBA program. Good luck to you," it was more like, "Here, you're going to be in charge of this company, but we're going to put a 5 to 6 person board behind you that includes industry leaders with 20, 30 years of experience, people we couldn't afford to hire to run this company, but would be fantastic at it. It's going to include customers. It's going to include like specialists in certain areas, so marketing, sales, wherever this CEO might be a little weaker, and we're going to have you meet with them on a monthly or quarterly basis to kind of level you up, and for you to have this sort of like team to rely on, while simultaneously getting to prove yourself. And if you do it really well, we're going to put you in charge of a bigger company next time. And if you do it really well, you might be able to go off and run your own company someday." So it's a really interesting like pipeline there. And so, Manny, you can kind of talk about where we've identified the opportunities for us, because we certainly don't have like thousands of employees to draw from, and we can't afford a lot of the maybe like higher end recent MBA graduates necessarily, but we can certainly do some similar things.
Yeah, which brings me, you had mentioned that one of your goals this year is to create this pipeline of businesses to buy and start those conversations. Well, my goal for this year is to create a pipeline of potential leaders and advisory board members. And I have to tell you, this is highly exciting to me because of course, right, we always want to enable our teams and, help them develop and grow. But this feels so much closer to actually doing that, removing myself more and more out of the operating of the businesses and working on a leadership pipeline or an advisory pipeline is very, very exciting to me. And so what we have done so far is we defined that probably the most efficient way to learn if somebody is the right fit for a specific operating company that we own, but also B, the right fit for reporting and working together with you and me on the high level fund setup and how the person relates to what the work in the fund is going versus leading the company, etc., is probably to bring in first somebody on a consultancy basis, let them work on an actual real project where we have a challenge in a business, something we want to improve, and see their skill level in making that work, but also already get to know the key players of the business. And then once that works, having another consultancy project where it's more about, okay, how to actually develop the business more and how to grow the business more. And in that way, it's a somewhat cheap version of getting to know the person, but also the person getting to know the business. And I've been very excited about that. We had several people being willing to start projects with us and being interested in potentially growing into a leadership role. And we're about to start rolling out the first consultancy project with somebody that I'm quite excited about. And we'll see where it goes. But I think in terms of how we approach it, so far it works. We identified people that want to do it. We got somebody in that will do it, and then we can see if that is a potential way for somebody to grow into business leadership.
Having a prior understanding with that person, a working relationship with a person, is de-risks that moving them into a CEO or COO role so much to me because again, like you could bring somebody in from the outside who does great in the interview process, but then you get them in that seat and you're pretty stuck with them. You don't want to go change that every 3 months, but you're stuck with them. And what if their cultural, like the way they run a company culture is just so different that everybody in the, the company just leaves, like everybody, all the individual contributors, or they don't mesh well with the team. Like I know interview processes can be help with that, but like at the end of the day, I think there's no substitute for actually going through working on projects with people. And so I love that approach.
I think one of the most important attitudes, I would say, that I think anybody should have, but especially if you want to be a leader of a company, is, uh, you know, kind of the approach of there's a problem, I will figure it out. Like, if the problem is big enough, I will figure out how to solve it, right? It's like, not I have other people that to do that thinking for me. No, you gotta figure it out. Doesn't matter how, but figure it out. And I think that is very hard to interview for, right? And it's also very hard to get like in like calls with previous employers or something like that. You just gotta see that person in action, work through this, and see, if they sink or swim, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing we've been looking at too is internal promotions. So people who have been with the company that are managers or, working their way into management roles, how could we build them a path to eventually run that company or another one maybe? I mean, one of the interesting things is as we build our talent pool bigger and bigger, I could foresee opportunities where somebody, let's say they're a director of sales at one company, they could outgrow that role. They could kind of be like, well, I've been a director of sales for 3 years. Like, where do I go next? Like, there's already a CEO up above me. There's not a clear spot for me. And we can say, oh, well, maybe we can get you in a role where you start to learn like the ropes from somebody and run this next company we're buying. So I think, again, like having like these pools of people, being able to vet them by actually working with them, and then moving them around to the place where it gives them career growth and us the opportunity to kind of fill these leadership holes is going to be really fun, really exciting, and like a big puzzle game to play over
Which
time.
is also where the advisory board comes in, right? As if I know some people and then I try to map them over other people that we have in the operating companies. I feel like, oh my God, these people are such a good fit. Like they really can benefit from each other. And, um, that's just a really nice feeling. I feel like for a long time in my career, I prided myself as being really good at, doing the hands-on work. And of course, all my family, my father, my mother, and my sister, they're teachers, right? So I like teaching too, but now feeling like the empowering and enabling other people to get good work done and bringing people together, that feels really good.
Yeah, I think that's like a common, again, when we were doing we sort of talking about our vision for what we're doing and the things that get us excited. I think that was common between both of us. Is like, I love that process too. Like seeing people grow and having like, just knowing I had a little hand in helping them grow in their career is so rewarding and so fun. And like, there's nothing like, hearing from somebody that like, years later that our work together impacted them in some meaningful way. So I think that's a really good, a good thing for us to just keep in mind, like how do we keep building that? How do we keep improving on that? So the other big goal we have is buy a couple more companies and hopefully in the next year, one or two more. So we've been, when we last quarter reflecting on last year, we had one LOI out, made a couple other offers as well, and nothing really went through. In hindsight, what I think I've realized is my focus was super narrow, and I got kind of too when I had a deal started, I kind of let all the other ones go and, got myself too focused on one thing at a time, which in a way is, you might think that would be good, but I think the challenge is because statistically, a lot of these deals will fall through. I've got to keep, more of them going for longer before it's going to actually, pay off the second time. So, this year, my goal, instead of being so, specific, is cast a little bit of a wider net on the companies we're looking for, but also just build up a conversation pipeline. Like, who are 100 people I can talk to this year that might sell in the next 5 years, or might know people who sell in the next 5 years, and that's it. Like, just have those conversations. And if I do that, I'm confident that we'll get one or two deals that actually go through this year. So that's kind of the approach I'm taking now. So we're doing a lot of different things instead of just, last year it was just me reaching out individually to a couple dozen companies. This year we're scaling it up with some cold outreach to companies. We're reaching back out to everybody we've talked to in the past 2 or 3 years. We are doing more like, or I'm doing more like heavy networking at, around EO and other places. We are really kind of like, we're doing this podcast, we're broadcasting what we're looking for a little more. So there's just many more irons in the fire this year than there was last year. And, part of that's because I have the capacity, like I'm a little more out of the day to day than I was, which is great. And then part of it is that I think that's for building a 10-year, 20-year vision. This is the work that needs to be done, the building this like long-term pipeline that I can just keep in touch with, all these people for years.
I agree. And it's also something that I think suits your personality well. You like talking with people, you like having conversations with new people, you like learning about new people. I'm personally a little bit more introvert. So to me, that is quite taxing and costing a bunch of energy. Whereas maybe to you as well, of course, right, at a certain point, it's all exhausting. I have a friend
Right.
who's very extrovert. He's a CEO of a company and he really likes what he's doing. But once it's the weekend, he doesn't want to do anything because he says, for the last 5 days, I just met people and talked all day, every day. So now I just want to sit down with my newspaper and read. That's literally what he says.
Yeah, I'm somewhere in the middle between extreme extrovert and extreme introvert. I'm definitely not on those extreme ends. But that said, I do enjoy when my day is mostly having these big visionary type conversations with other CEOs. That is like, to me right now in this point in my career, one of the most fun things. So yesterday I did 2 podcast recordings with entrepreneurs, super, like inspiring and fun to do. I did a couple acquisition potential meetings where we're just talking about the potential of what we could be like if we merged forces, stuff like that. It's like very high in the sky, but it's very fun because it just like feels like you're getting to take a little bit of creation with another person. And sometimes it goes well and like you gel, and sometimes it doesn't. And you're like, okay, this is not gonna be my style. But I really love that part of it, the open-endedness. And then it is like, I think it does lend to my strengths of like, I like to inspire other people and get them excited about something. And something I've noticed in having, dozens of these conversations with small business owners in the last couple of months is that a lot of times when they answer that email that says, "Hey, I might be interested in buying your company or merging," they're a little bit burned out and ready for something new and exciting in their life. Now, sometimes it's not that they want to sell, but it's like they're at this point where I can just see in their eyes, they're like overworked, not really feeling like they're figuring out something. They kind of feel stuck in some way. And the fact that we might be able to work with them to help them, unlock the next level is really exciting to them. So I've been trying to, open up my approach. Instead of saying just, we want to buy your company outright, that's one option, sure. But like the other option is you could stay around, you could merge in with us and you could kind of help build this bigger thing. And we can kind of like go ahead and we could double your revenue overnight by combining your company with ours. And we'll let you run it. We'll let you, operate it as you are and do bigger and better things. And some people are excited by that more than they are selling. So I think there's some cool opportunities here where like, because we're approaching this with a very open mind and just seeing where the conversations go, there could be some really cool things that happen this year.
Yeah, and with cool opportunities also come very interesting challenges because, for example, with a merger, like you and I talked about the relationship being like a marriage and figuring out how people tick and how they think. But with a merger, that's extremely important, right? Will you actually merge your existing company with another company and potentially let the leaders of that company lead the entity?
If we can find a way to align incentives and cover enough of our downside that we're comfortable, enough of their downside that they're comfortable, why not? Right? Like, because again, one thing I keep going back to as I think about this and talk about with other people is my goal is not to build one single company that is the best, X for Y type company. Like, that's fine. Like, yeah, that's a good goal to have. My goal is to figure out how to build the machine that does that over and over at like, a consistent level, not every single one of them is, necessarily winning their industry. Like, of course, we all want it to be there, but like they're going to have up years and down years. They're going to have leadership gaps. They're going to have really great leaders. It's like things are going to happen. And so I try to pull back and be like, okay, if I owned 20 companies, would I care about, this merging in with this one and the CEO being a little subpar and like the thing kind of goes flat for a couple of years? Like, no, I wouldn't care. It's like you got 20 of them. Like, I can't worry so much about one single one. I can't be that precious with it. Now, again, I know we're not really there, so there are practical constraints, but it's like to think like that starts to open up to like, I have to be willing to let stuff go. Like, I have to be willing to let a leader come in who's not as good as me, or I think it's not as good as me, and let them learn, let them grow.
I think, yeah, totally letting go. But what I was more thinking about is figuring out a way how you figure out if these people have what it takes. And have what it takes means probably company culture, but also just like, knowing how to lead a business and, run it profitable in a profitable way.
And do they even want to? Here, this is another thing I've discovered talking to, again, hundreds probably of small business owners in the last few years, is like some of them don't think about their businesses as a business. And what I mean is they think about it truly as a purely a lifestyle for them. And often that lifestyle does not involve taking a lot of profit home. Like for better or for worse, like I talked to a business owner this last week who has been running her business for many years, has really good revenue that is like a worthwhile business to buy, but her margin that she's paid herself is way below market rate. And she's never, she's not running like in the black. She's always running right at the edge. She's paying herself at 55K a year, very low salary for what she's doing. And it's because she's, again, there's some practical things there where she's overpaying some people, she's undercharging some clients because she wants to keep them and like all this stuff. It's what is hard is if that person comes in and runs this company, I'm going to tell them like, look, you have to run it so that it works on paper too. Like it doesn't, I know people matter, absolutely. But like, if we're not making like fair margins and we're not able to pay you a fair rate salary, this is not a sustainable business. It's just like a hobby project for you. So
that attitude is a detriment to the business, and the business is people combined doing work. So if you do that, it's not sustainable, right? Either for your employees or for yourself, and neither of these two is good for anybody.
right. Yeah. So it's a tricky balance. Again, like I talk like I would take a merger with anybody, that anything is possible. But like the reality is like you do have to be willing to come in and run a business in a real way, like with real, consistent margins, with real pay, real salary for the CEO, things like that. But again, like I think if we get a business owner similar size to one of ours, they want to merge together and run the combined entity. They're willing to give up some of their control and equity for a more consistent salary and a bigger team to work with and bigger client base to work from. There could be a lot of upside for them as well, where they can kind of start to, again, they're going to get a rev share, profit share of some kind. There's going to be a lot of things there too that are going to be beneficial. So it's still a dream, and we'll see how it actually pans out this year. I'll be interested, to look back at this quarterly check-in in like a year and be like, were we anywhere close to that? Or are we just like living in dreamland? I don't know.
At least it pulls us towards the right
Yeah.
direction, right? And that's
Yeah.
what it's about.
Totally. So, we were going to like talk too about specific plans for each company, in case anybody is interested. So to remind those of you, and we live in this every day, so we know our companies well, but I'll give a quick overview. We own two businesses today. There's Draft.dev, that, is a technical content marketing company, do content marketing for software development tools, software tools for developers. So very specific niche. It's yeah, it's going well, but it's a pretty up and down market because a lot of these companies rely on VC funding, and so there's a lot of fluctuations just because of that in our client base. But it's pretty stable right now. And then the podcast consultant, which we bought a year and a half ago, does podcast post production, editing, and launches mostly for financial advisors and financial industry shows. They do the work on this show. If you'd like our editing, they're great. Sign up. Go to thepodcastconsultant.com. But yeah, so those are two businesses. Manny, what are we focused on at the podcast consultant? Let's start there.
Yeah, podcast consultant was basically the margins of the business are pretty good. And so what we decided to do were the following things. We were niching down harder into finance because that's where most of our organic clients are from. That's where we get a lot of referrals. So, we are now reflecting this more in our messaging on our website, for example, with the examples that we give in case studies, etc. And we're also added a few members to the core team to allow for future growth. So now we have a launch specialist now who only takes care of the podcast launches, and we have other people that have more consistent hours working on the same kind of things. So, for example, social media clips, video clips, all of this kind of stuff. So, I would say the whole setup is much more solid now and is ready to take on growth, which is the goal of this year. So, last year has been slow growth, solid. We built out this core team. We now have a core team of people that, in a very reliable way, very quickly can deliver a good product for our clients. And now we're basically stepping on growth. We have enough profit in the business to start some growth initiatives in marketing and in sales. So I'm very excited about that. And we certainly are set up to grow at least 30 or 40% in weekly incoming work with that team.
Yeah, I think one of the encouraging things, like you kind of hinted at there, like revenue's been pretty flat since we bought it, which is a little, there's a side of me that's like always wants to go faster. That's a little bummed by that. But on the other side, like I talk to a lot of people who've acquired businesses, and they talk about this thing called the J curve, where typically when you acquire a business, you're an outside, person like us, there's a dip before there's a grow. So what you usually, it means you have to, invest in learning the business, learning the clients. You have to invest in some marketing things and some growth things, and those take time to sort of build and get in and then finally pay off. Hopefully, we didn't experience that dip, so that's good. I mean, in a way, it's like we've just been flat, which is better than a dip. And so I'm encouraged by that, to be honest. Like, I think, when I talk to enough people, I'm like, we've actually had a pretty good outcome in just a year and a half. And I think, like you said, there's a lot of fundamentals we put in place that make the business stronger, more able to run without us. And now it's getting more inbound leads and organic, leads as well as referrals than it ever has been. So like the pipeline is starting to be there to get, where we need to go to grow.
I also think, as you mentioned, right, it's about the business being able to run without us. Because if we would step in more directly into the business, I think, we could close more deals, we could get more deals in, but gotta keep the eye on the prize, which is these businesses need to function pretty much without our involvement long term, and that's the main goal here. So of course, if we start making incredible net losses every month, of course we'll jump in and try to help fix it and repair it, right? But we're in a privileged and maybe well-deserved position because I mean, not to toot our own horn here, but I think we're doing the stuff in a pretty smart way, right? So it's been working out well. But there is also, if pardon my French, if shit hits the fan, we know ways on how to, repair things pretty quickly.
So there's the podcast consultant. Definitely this year is focused on trying to figure out some options for growth beyond just what we're doing. Keep trying new channels as well as other ways to upsell existing customers and sell bigger packages. Things like that is what we're working on. I'll speak to the Draft.dev side because that's it's been an interesting ride with Draft.dev. Many of you have listened for a while. The first couple of years that I started that business, it grew super fast. Just like did not expect it at all. It was a wild ride. We were hiring like crazy. We were at one point, looking at our numbers, we were at like a $5 million a year run rate by year 2.5. Like it was just nuts. And then the bottom fell out when interest rates started to rise and companies in the VC funding started to drop, venture capital funding. And so it's settled down to a much smaller size now, but it is also much more stable now than it has been. And the things we did to get there were we've moved pretty heavily up market. Whereas in the early days, I was selling to early stage startups who, when they have lots of cash from investors, they have to spend it in 18 months. So it was a, cash in, cash out, like people were paying for things, but they were almost never renewing, and long-term contracts were impossible. So it was very unstable. We just constant churn. Now we have it to a point where most of our clients are on 6-month or annual contracts. They're bigger companies. They're more stable. They know what their marketing looks like and their budgets look like. We're not working directly with founders who are constantly a bottleneck and very picky about things that honestly don't matter in the long run. So there's a lot of things that have improved in the business despite it being smaller. Interesting thing as well to note is that I think 3 of our biggest competitors all fell apart last year, just completely went away. I tried to buy a couple of them, never went through because of lots of internal issues that were happening over there. But basically, the well dried up, and the people in our industry who had not built sustainable marketing channels and repeatable marketing channels all went to zero. And it's kind of crazy to see that because this was such a hot industry 2, 3 years ago. And then in the last year, it's just been dead. So that's the background for that business. So our goal this year is continue to maintain that stability, build bigger, longer term contracts with our existing clients, and continue to move ourselves and be more appealing to the upmarket clients that can, pay for long-term relationships and that want us to be more strategically involved. We have, in the past been very much like a tactical partner that just writes content. And now we're starting to do more content strategy, promotional strategy, things like that, that are elevating our value and moving us up the value chain. So Draft.dev is no longer just saying, hey, we'll write you some articles for a few $1,000s. It's now, we're going to help you build a sustainable and scalable content pipeline that leads to real leads and real customers. And it's a much different approach. You end up pitching further up the chain in marketing. You're talking to leaders of marketing teams instead of the down level tactician people. You're more strategically involved. The sales cycles are longer, so that's the downside. And your bar to entry or barrier to entry is higher because we are somebody you have to trust with a lot more than in the past. So there's pros and cons to it, but it's certainly made the business more stable, which for us in the, the 10-year, 20-year time horizon, stability is much more interesting than rocket ship up and down all the time.
What's also interesting to note here is reflecting that change in who we're talking to and who we're selling to led us to rebrand. And I'm pretty excited to mention that in February, the new brand for Draft.dev will be going out. And, you could always say, oh, it's just how things look. Like to quote Bill McKighty's, brand is every touch point you have with a business, and the website and the material around that is part of it. But obviously, much more important the interactions you have with the people of the business. But personally, I'm very excited about the rebrand because I think still with Draft.dev is somewhat known in the industry, but a lot of people perceive it as, oh, I get blog posts from them. And we now might be talking about AI and the impact of AI on written content. This is a question I get a lot. Do you have to pivot? What was your approach there, etc.? But sure, we create blog posts as well as helping on a very strategic level drive awareness, capture leads, and get thought leadership and trust with a developer audience, right? So we are much more, as you mentioned, we're higher up the chain. It's about the ROI. It's like building sales pipeline of actual businesses you can sell to instead of the deliverable being, okay, here's a 2,000 word text piece in a Google Doc, right? It's much more how our content and lead generation and revenue generation for the client interlinked, and how do we help them accomplish this in a repeatable way?
I'll say something about branding because I am like Manny and I are. It's good that we're opposites on this, and not opposites completely. So I started Draft.dev with a Google font and absolutely $0 invested in any kind of design or brand. I mean, like, look, I tried to use the same font and colors everywhere. That's to the extent of my branding, like that I thought about, and it was not a thought through process. Like I didn't look at, I didn't analyze our market. It was very much like we have to have a website. We have to have something up there. I'm the only one doing everything. So I did it. And that's totally fine in the early days. Right. But now again, we're moving our positioning, but not only that, we're kind of trying to hand off more of that ownership of Draft.dev to the team and to like, I think part of it is kind of giving them a brand that isn't just Karl's brand that he made up in his, in his little home office in a weekend. So I think there's something to that part too. The emotional tie of like, for me, is like letting it go and giving it a new facelift that is not mine anymore. It feels like it's rubbing more and more of my thumbprints off of it, which is good. Like it is, again, that is our goal, is not to be Karl's little cool company. It is to be something else.
Which, what you said, I love this so much because so many people would cling to, people say my company is my baby, but actually, right, there's this like super cliche, super like cringe kind of quote, which is, if you love something, let it go, and if it comes back, it's yours forever, right? And it's kind of the company is the same thing. If you want to build something truly sustainable, then it needs to work without you. And so
Totally.
it's the right attitude to have, but it's hard, right? It's hard to have that attitude.
All right, so we're going to kind of wrap up here, Manny. Let's talk about books because I always ask this question to podcast guests. What's something you've been reading lately that's made an impact on you?
Yeah, what I had mentioned earlier with the attitude to, think about the long term and play the long game. A book I really enjoyed was or is called The Will to Keep Winning. It's by Daigo Umehara, and he is actually it's very interesting. I used to love computer games as a kid, and I still do, but I don't spend as much time on it as I want to. But Daigo Umehara is a really really good fighting games like Street Fighter and stuff like that champion. And what is interesting about him is, yeah, he has been world number one a few times, but really for the last 20 years, he's always been among the top three. And in this book, he writes about the attitude and the training, like approach that he takes to keep winning, to keep staying at the top, because he says, it's I mean, it's not easy, but it's doable for somebody to be a number one for a short blip in time. But what's really special is if you have longevity, if you can stay at the top for the long time. And so how does your day to day and week over week have to look like for that? And I really like it. It's this attitude. It's very almost dry. So for example, right, I'm from Austria, and all of this, the US has this, which is very helpful, like amazing and awesome and over the top and everything is great, right? And if you say, hey, the food is good, everybody thinks it's horrible. But no, it is what I said, it's good, right? And so he talks about, you always want to be at a level of 60% satisfaction. That's just right. You don't want to be 100% because that's just crazy. How can you sustain that, right? And if you have a really good time, go for a few days to 80% satisfaction, but then settle in again at 60% satisfaction, because that's how you win the long-term game. So if you have a work day where you're always 60% satisfied, it means you're not unsatisfied, but it also means there's enough threshold for some happiness spikes, but really you can be satisfied with every day. And with that attitude, slow and steady, you can improve, you get better, and you can play the long game, as opposed to somebody that works. Like, he talks a lot about competitors that worked and trained towards a specific event where a lot of money was to be made. And afterwards, they got this, like, they won and they were so satisfied with themselves, and then they fell off forever. And for him, I mean, I know it's kind of, he won a lot as well, so he also makes good money, right? But for him, it was like, it's not about winning the prize money. The daily goal is improving yourself. And so if he played a good game but lost, it doesn't matter, because he felt like, okay, I improved myself. And I think that's a great attitude to have. And I think one other aspect that was really interesting about his story is, you know, it's a very non-traditional career. When he started, he just knew he had this passion. He had no idea how to make money from it. It was not at all right. Esports are now somewhat mainstream, right? And there are leagues and you can make money of it. There was nothing like that. Zero. And so he still pursued that path because he knew it was his passion. And in some way he would figure out how to kind of make a living from it. And he did, which is great. So it was quite inspiring. And what I like the best about it is just this, like, even keeled approach, chip away at things consistently, and then it will work out. Don't get those spikes in, right? Everybody always says it's a marathon, not a sprint. That's kind of the attitude, right? But he really set up his life and his day-to-day work in a way where he can just consistently be happy and satisfied with his life over 20 years, which is great.
I love that. As I was just talking to my brother-in-law about this. He and I both like to run a fair bit, and I'm not in any way like a competitive runner, but competitive with myself. And I used to set these really hardline goals, like I'm going to run a marathon by X date, and I, would kind of like push through any injury to get there because it was all about just running, getting to that level and at that date. And now he and I were both lamenting on how you get older and you start getting injured more often. And you're like, that's not really sustainable to do that. Like, yes, you could, like, he's got a knee injury going, and it's like, yeah, he could fight through it and like be in pain every day and go run his miles he's supposed to do to hit his next goal. But like, why do that when you want to have I want to have 30 more years of running, like I don't want to be broken in 2 years because I just pushed through every little pain. So I think there's this like I'm learning this patience and sustainability in my pacing of things for sure, and I'm much more now taking the time off when I need to on these physical things, because it's like, if it doesn't feel good, I'm not going to do it. I want to do this for 30 years, not just like hit this race, like that race is, there'll be plenty more, right? Like it's not that serious. I think the same way in our business, like if we spend 80-hour weeks trying to get like another $500,000 in sales this year or something like that, like how long can we do that realistically? We can't. Like our wives would leave us, our kids would be gone from our lives. Like there's so many things that would just start to drop off from the richness of our lives that it's just not worth it.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, there's some similar themes in this too. I read a book by Andrew Wilkinson. He just wrote his book. He runs a company called Tiny that has done a lot of acquisitions, and so I listen to a lot of things that he puts out. The book's called Never Enough, and I don't know that I like strongly recommend it to everybody, because autobiographies, there's some that I don't want to knock them, because like there's a little bit of retconning in any autobiography. Here's what I'll say. Like they know where they are today, and they're not giving an objective like play by play of their life. They're kind of telling you, based on where I am today, what did I see as the key events? And so they're picking and choosing, right? That's just the nature of autobiography. And but what is interesting about it is he had within 20 years, 15, 20 years or whatever, had a rise from working as a barista and like kind of side hustling at night with an agency to being, on paper at least, a billionaire. And even if he's not a billionaire, he's like a 500 millionaire, which is still pretty freaking close. So whatever you want to call it. And the interesting thing in there was seeing the arc of how there are some things that got easier in his life for sure, but then a lot of things didn't change. It wasn't like he got all of a sudden this just satisfaction from running bigger and bigger companies, or that the anxiety around what if these things go to zero went away. Like none of that happened. He still feels those same fears, anxieties, and struggles. And other thing, like, so these things are hard. And then other things got even harder. Like he can't be he can't live a normal life because people show up at his doorstep and like, are kind of crazily asking him questions or asking him for money and things. Like it's like this, because he's got a certain amount of celebrity. It's like he now has like a more restricted life than he ever had before. And I don't think he like laments having $500 million like by any means, but I do think he like kind of is thinking about that in terms of like, that you give up something when you become that successful and that famous. And I it's not even close to our roadmap. Like, I don't know that we'll ever get to that point or anything. But what's interesting is thinking about like, what do you really want? And are you enjoying the day to day? Because that's all you have, versus are you always trying to be like, where's that next goal? Where's that next goal? Because it's never going to stop. Like there's always going to be a bigger hill that you can climb. And, somebody like him shows you, like he's always thinking about the next big thing too.
Yeah, I would not want to be a celebrity. I can't imagine going out of the house and not being, just like that sense of not even privacy, just like, give me my space.
Right. He tells stories, and I've heard others where people approach him at restaurants with crazy ideas, or like this guy like pulled up to his house in a boat because he lives on the lake or
Oh,
on
wow.
the coast, and one morning he's just like knocking at his back door. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with people?
Yeah.
Oh, anyway. So yeah, thanks for listening, everybody, and thanks for coming on, Manny. I love doing this little recap. And we'll be back in about a quarter with another one of these every 3 or so months. If you want to find out more about what we're doing, you can always check us out on LinkedIn, Karl Hughes with a K, and Manuel Weiss, with a M.
EISS.
Yeah, double S. So yeah, you can always look us up and kind of see we write about that on LinkedIn, as well as following this podcast. I usually give some little updates here and there as we're in interviews. And thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for being here, Manny.
Was great as always.
Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.